All right, welcome into an impromptu edition of the Panther-Lair show. I wish we were gathered here under better circumstances, but we try to do these breaking news live streams when something happens. Try and go live and talk about it here on the Panther-Lair show here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And it's a Saturday afternoon. We had some news here on Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon. And it's a news that comes out about that man you see in the photos right there on the screen, Jaylen Twyman, number 97. He announced on Saturday morning that he was going to opt out of the 2020 season, enter the 2021 NFL draft. I think everyone expected him to enter the 2021 NFL draft. I think most people just expected him to do so after playing the 2020 season. And I want to just start off with Jaylen Twyman's statement. Just start off with his announcement about deciding to opt out, and he put it on Twitter, and I think it was a good statement, a poignant statement. And if you haven't seen it, I think we should just set the table with that. Jaylen Twyman in a tweet says, quote, "I started playing football when I was 6 years old. I immediately fell in love with it. Football has changed my life. It has led me to places that I could only dream of growing up in Lincoln Heights. Football has brought me to Pitt, and I love it so much. I love putting on that blue and gold helmet and grinding with my brothers. This past year has been crazy for so many people. It makes you realize you have responsibilities beyond yourself, and that's why I have decided to opt out of the 2020 season and declare for the 2021 NFL draft. And to return home to be with my family. This isn't about COVID-19. This is about my family's needs now and in the future. I want to thank Coach Narduzzi for his support in my decision. He has always believed in me. I want to thank him for giving me the chance to pursue my dreams at Pitt and beyond Pitt. I want to thank Coach Partridge, who made me a better person and player every day. I want to thank Panther Nation for their love. I will miss running out of that Heinz Field tunnel and hearing thunder struck." I don't know why I pronounced it like that. Continuing his quote, "I promised my mother and Coach Narduzzi that I will finish my degree at the University of Pittsburgh. Pitt will always be a part of me, forever a Pitt man." And that's Jaylen Twyman making his announcement that he's not going to return. And there's a lot in there. In particular, I think the first thing you're drawn to in Jaylen Twyman's statement is that he says it's not about COVID-19. It's about his family's needs now and in the future. And, obviously, news like this comes out and you make a lot of phone calls and you start to talk to people and you try and find out what happened here. Because on Friday, when we talked to Pat Narduzzi, we talked to Randy Bates, Pitt's defensive coordinator, we talked to Patrick Jones, Pitt's defensive line or defensive end, and DeMar Hamlin, safety at Pitt, a bunch of guys who would be sort of intimately connected to Jaylen Twyman and maybe know what he's thinking or what's going on. Not one of them said anything about the potential of any player on the team opting out, and certainly not Jaylen Twyman. And Pat Narduzzi even said he didn't have any players opting out and anything like that. I think this is a decision that really kind of came together, in the last 16 hours. We talked to them about 24 hours ago. We talked to them on Friday at 1 o'clock. Right now it's Saturday at 1, quarter after 1 when we're talking here. And I think the decision kind of came over that time. I do think it's connected to some issues at home. Some things he has to deal with, some personal reasons. Like he said, he needs to, be with his family. If this was going to be a regular season, would he still be making that decision? I don't know. I think certainly the environment around college football, the climate of college football right now, I wouldn't go so far as to say it accelerated a decision for him, but I think it maybe made it a little easier. Because there are a lot of players opting out right now. I think the number's got to be over 30 at this point. Just in FBS, Power 5, maybe not just Power 5, but in the FBS, I think you're looking at probably more than 30 guys opting out in college football. So, I mean, it's almost easier to do this year or more acceptable to do this year. And if it makes the most sense for you, not just in terms of where you are as an NFL draft prospect, but what you need to do for your family, what you need to do for the people who are important to you, then you got to go ahead with that. And that's what Jaylen Twyman has decided to do. There's no question it's a big loss for Pitt. I guess you start off by saying, look, best of luck to Jaylen Twyman. I don't think I'm going to really disrespect any player's decision at this point. These guys who feel like they need to go, they should do it. It's, we're all on this side of the aisle. We're watching this team. We want to see this team. We want to see this team play at full strength because they should be pretty good, and especially the defense should be really good. That's not our decision to make, obviously. He's got to do what he feels is best for him, and I don't think anybody on that team is going to hold it against him. I don't think anybody among the fans or the media should hold it against him. These are decisions that these players have to make, and it's not a decision against team or against the team. It's a decision made with the understanding that there are a lot of factors in life. There are a lot of things that impact you in life. And it's not just football and not just the team, but you have family considerations as well. You have things you have to take care of yourself, and sometimes you have to make these difficult decisions. And talking to Jaylen Twyman a lot over the last 4 years, really even 5 or 6 years, if you go back to talking to him as a recruit, he's a team guy. I think he's completely dedicated and committed to this team as much as he can possibly be. I think you look at how he changed his body heading into last season. If you look at Jaylen Twyman in September of 2019 versus Jaylen Twyman in September of 2018, and I think all the photos that we have running on the slideshow here during the live stream, these photos are all from the last year, so you wouldn't have any comparisons there. But, he was a different guy, and you could see it. And a lot of it came from training with Aaron Donald and seeing how Aaron Donald trained and trying to emulate that. Because, look, if you want to be cut out of stone, you could do a lot worse than trying to follow Aaron Donald's path. He changed his body, and it was because of a dedication to the team, a dedication to the craft, a dedication to making himself better for the team. And the results played out on the field. Jaylen Twyman last year with 12 tackles for loss, a team-leading 10.5 sacks. He was tied for the team lead in tackles for loss, along with Patrick Jones, who also had 12. An all-conference player, got some All-American considerations. He was a preseason All-American, preseason All-Conference player. He was going to be one of these defensive tackles people talk about across the country. Simply, for starters, because he put up 10.5 sacks. And I don't know if he was going to repeat that number. There was a part of me that kind of felt like he probably wouldn't have 10.5 sacks again. There's a few weeks ago we talked about whether Pitt could repeat 50 sacks in 13 games like they had last year. And they're obviously not going to play 13 games, so that number is going to be hard to reach. But as we talked about the sack distribution, I said, look, if I had to bet money on Jaylen Twyman's numbers, he probably won't have 10.5 sacks again in 2020. That's a hard number for a defensive tackle to repeat unless you're a guy like Aaron Donald. And I don't think Aaron Donald ever really went back-to-back with double-digit sacks. And so that was always going to be tough, but I felt like the rest of the team could kind of make it up. They've got all these really good defensive ends, and I felt like the numbers would balance out. What I really wanted to see from Jaylen Twyman in 2020, and I talked about this a lot, what I really wanted to see from Jaylen Twyman in 2020 was an improvement in tackles for loss, an improvement in making plays behind the line of scrimmage. Last year he had 12 tackles for loss, 10.5 of those were sacks, and that's great. You want the sacks as much as you can. But he was on the field for a ton of snaps. And to only have 1.5 plays behind the line of scrimmage against the run, you wanted to see a little bit more than that. And there are different things about how teams attack and what kind of running games teams use and whether, how Pitt's defense is set up and all of that. And you're not going to just blanket or just blindly say, oh, he should have this many tackles for loss. But I think he could have improved in that regard. And when we talk about Jaylen Twyman's draft prospects, and you'll find different things across the internet, you could find him listed as a potential first-round draft pick. You'll find him listed as a potential or 2 or a 3, or a guy who needs to play himself into the 3rd round. You can find, I always say this with draft prognostication and draft evaluations and analysis, particularly in August, that whatever you want to believe, you can probably find somebody out there who's writing it. We had Nate Peterman potentially going in the 1st round or maybe the 2nd round, after 2016. So because you could find those write-ups online, and Pitt fans, like any other fan base, if they get a write-up that's favorable to their team, that looks good for their team, they're gonna pump it out all over the place. They're going to retweet it and post it on message boards and things like that. And so you can find those articles about Twyman. You can find him projected as a 1st-round draft pick. I felt like the thing he needed to do, and this was just me personally, guy who doesn't know anything, what I felt like he needed to do was get a little bit better at making plays behind the line of scrimmage that weren't just sacks. The sacks were great, and you need to keep that up. If you're a great pass-rushing defensive tackle, you're going to play in the NFL. And I think Jaylen Twyman is a great pass-rushing defensive tackle. But to really make himself into a 1st-round draft pick, I think he needed to add to that and become even more disruptive against the run than he might have been. And I think he still disrupted those plays. And somebody like Charlie Partridge might say, hey, man, you're a moron. Even though he only had 1.5 tackles for loss against the run, he was still disrupting plays and causing plays to be made for his teammates. You know, I mean, Kylan Johnson had 10.5 tackles for loss. Phil Campbell had 8. Cam Bright had 9. You know, those guys were getting those tackles for loss because, because of what was happening in front of them. You know what I mean? They were getting help from the guys in front of them, and I think, Twyman had a lot to do with that. So it's a big loss, either way. Even if I think there are things that he needed to do better and could do better and things he could have improved this season, I think, it goes without saying that it's a really big loss. So you kind of go forward then, and the next question is, how do you replace Jaylen Twyman? Well, you're probably not going to replace him directly. I think, having Keyshawn Camp back, Keyshawn Camp is a guy who can make plays in the backfield as a defensive tackle, as a pass rushing defensive tackle. I think he has the potential to be a great pass rushing defensive tackle. He just needs to stay healthy and stay on the field. But he's not exactly a replacement for Jaylen Twyman because he was going to be out there with Twyman anyway, right? You were going to have Twyman and Camp as your starters. Now you're going to have Camp and someone else. I think Devin Danielson is probably the most likely option. A redshirt sophomore this year, played in every game last season. I think he made some starts. I forget. I would have to go back and look at that. Not terribly productive. 12 tackles in 13 games, only 1 tackle for loss, 2 quarterback hurries. But defensive tackles, you don't always get big production numbers. It's not always going to show up in the box score. You need to look a little deeper and find those guys who are able to impact the play, even if they're not making the tackle. They're causing the tackle to be made, even if they're not making the tackle. And Devin Danielson might be that kind of player. And then the other 2 young guys you saw get work last season, David Green and Tyler Bentley. Both played in. Well, I guess Bentley played in 13 games and Green played in 12. Not a lot in the way of production out of those guys. Bentley had 7 tackles. 2 of them were for a loss, though, and he had a pass breakup. Those 2 guys are going to be the backups behind Camp and Danielson this season. Those are the 2 that you're going to be looking at. And then the wild card is the redshirt freshman, Kalijah Kancey, who I've heard a lot of positive about, or not even but a lot of positive talk about Kalijah Kancey over the last 8 months or so, really since the season ended. As guys reflected back on the season last year, looking at the scout team, and then a few of those spring camp practices that actually happened, I would talk to people and then say, look, Kalijah Kancey is that next maybe undersized, quick defensive tackle who's going to be disruptive and make plays in the backfield. Jaylen Twyman, kind of undersized. Aaron Donald, kind of undersized. They're not that big, beefy, bulky defensive tackle who takes up a lot of space, but what they are is they're quick, they're explosive, and they're able to get around the interior linemen who a lot of times don't have as quick a feet as they do, as the defensive tackles do. And Kancey, it seems like, is going to be that next guy, Kalijah Kancey. So keep an eye on him. He could be another one who comes out and maybe has a breakout season. Now, he's going to have 4 guys ahead of him, right? You've got a full 2 deep with Keyshawn Camp and Devin Danielson and then Tyler Bentley and David Green. So, Kalijah Kancey we look at as, maybe the 5th guy. But he'll be in the rotation. I think, he will be in the rotation. And, even last year, Keyshawn Camp he only played 1 game. But you still saw the rotation of 4 guys with Twyman, Amir Watts, Bentley, and Green. I think that Charlie Partridge would not have any issues with rotating in a 5th guy this year, particularly if it's Kancey who shows some promise. And then after that, their recruiting at defensive tackle hasn't been. It hasn't been great. I think they've signed 1 in the last 2 classes. I don't think they signed anybody in 2020, unless I'm forgetting someone off the top of my head, which is entirely possible and even likely. I'm going to look it up on the scholarship board on Panther-Lair.com real quick just to make sure. But I don't think they brought in a defensive tackle last year. I think they only signed 1 in the last 2 classes, and that's why they're going so hard on defensive tackles in this 2021 class, where they've got Elliott Donald already committed, and you see them kind of pushing to get a little bit more. Yeah, they didn't get anybody in the class last year. I guess the 19 class, Nate Temple moved to defensive tackle, so you kind of got 2 guys there. But, that's basically your depth. is Camp, Danielson, Bentley, Green, and then Cansey. And then, you have Nate Temple, Noah Palmer. Those guys, you see where they fit in. Maybe one of the other defensive ends, DeAndre Jules or Bryson Elms moves to defensive tackle. You fill in some depth there, but you're going to have those upperclassmen kind of leading the way. The key will really be keeping Keyshawn Camp healthy. If Keyshawn Camp can stay healthy, they should be able to get good production out of the defensive tackles. And then you'll still have the defensive ends out there, Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver and Deslin Alexandra and Habakkuk Baldonado and John Morgan. I mean, those guys will still be out there making plays on the outside, which is big for you. I mean, you need that. The strength of this defensive line was defensive end. It still is defensive end. That's where they're strongest. That's where they're deepest. And that was the case before Jaylen Twyman opted out, and it's the case now that he has opted out. So best of luck to Jaylen Twyman. I think he's going to play in the NFL and have a good career in the NFL. I think he'll be a playmaker in the NFL. Would have liked to have seen what he could have done in his final year at Pitt, but can't really fault the guy for making this decision right now. Can't really fault any of these guys for making this decision right now. It's crazy times. When you've got the MAC canceling and you've got, I'm not going to go down the road of just different things that are going on because it's, I always talk about how there's cycles up and down of optimism and pessimism about the 2020 football season. And I'm going to be honest, as we sit here on Saturday afternoon, August 8th, 2020, I'm cycling more toward the side that says there's no season Jaylen Twyman is going to be even opting out of. He opted out of a season that's probably not going to happen. Or it might happen in the spring, which, whatever. I'm not really too sold on the idea of football happening on the spring. So, anyway, those are my thoughts on Jaylen Twyman opting out. Like I say, best of luck to him. I think he's a great kid. He's always been fun to talk to. He's always been nice to talk to. He seems like he's genuinely loved by his teammates. He loves his teammates. He loves his team. He's got things he's got to take care of. He's got family things he needs to tend to. And, team is number one, but family's got to be higher. Family is the number one above the number one, and Jaylen Twyman's got to do what he's got to do. So best of luck to him. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you check out the website, Panther-Lair.com. We've got more coverage on Jaylen Twyman's decision and plus lots of other stuff going on covering this Pitt football team as they continue to prepare for the 2020 season, and we all continue to hope that there's a 2020 season that actually happens. So thanks for tuning in. We'll be back on Tuesday night for our regularly scheduled 8:30 p.m. podcast right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We'll release that as an audio podcast, on Wednesday, and, we'll have all our regular stuff. The Panthers Insider Show on Saturday morning at 8 a.m. Lots of Pitt content for you to consume, and certainly we'll be talking about Jaylen Twyman a lot this week, and we'll see if anybody else decides to opt out and join him. And we'll see if by the next time we talk, if there's still plans to be a 2020 football season. All right. Thanks again for tuning in. Have a great rest of the weekend. And hopefully we don't have to talk to you again until Tuesday night. But if something big comes up, we'll talk to you right here on Panther-Lair.com.